Here's the part nobody really explains about avoidance when they're getting ready to reconnect. They don't wake up one morning with a sudden urge to text you. There's no dramatic moment where clarity strikes like lightning. What actually happens is much quieter. It's a slow breakdown of their defenses, like water wearing away stone over time. And long before they ever type a message, long before they even consider hitting send, their behavior has already told the whole story. Most people sit around waiting for the text, the call, the DM. But by the time that happens, weeks of meaningful signals have already passed unnoticed. Because avoidants don't reconnect on impulse. They move when internal pressure builds so slowly and steadily that it eventually becomes impossible to suppress. And that pressure leaks out through very specific, very observable patterns. Avoidants genuinely convince themselves they're fine with distance. They believe their own story, that they're better off alone, that they don't really need anyone, that solitude equals freedom. But their nervous system tells a different truth. Their attachment system tells another story entirely. And sooner or later, those inner contradictions start showing up in their behavior in ways they can't fully regulate or hide. What follows are 8 behaviors that quietly reveal an avoidant is working up to reaching out, even while they're still telling themselves they won't. The first shift is that they start monitoring your world with almost surgical focus. This is how it usually begins. They're no longer just vaguely aware of what you're doing. They've become a quiet observer of your life. They know your schedule without asking. They know when you post, when you're active, what you seem interested in lately. This isn't accidental anymore. It's deliberate. It's research. An avoidant who's inching toward reconnection becomes intensely curious about your current reality. What's changed? Are you dating someone? Are you happy? Are you still the version of you they remember? Or have you evolved into someone new? They're mentally updating their file on you because they need to know what they'd be stepping back into. This often looks like them watching every story you post, sometimes more than once. It looks like them being online exactly when your activity suggests you might be online. It looks like them knowing details about your life that you never told them directly, because they've been quietly tracking everything. Think of it like someone preparing for an important interview. Before they walk through the door, they study the company, the culture, the recent changes, the key players. That's exactly what an avoidant does with your life before attempting reconnection. Reaching out without knowing what to expect feels too threatening. Observation feels safer. What matters here is this. Casual curiosity doesn't create consistent patterns. Emotional investment does. When someone shifts from occasional awareness to methodical monitoring, something fundamental has changed. They're no longer protecting distance. They're slowly closing it, gathering courage through information. The second behavior is that they begin engineering situations where your paths might naturally cross. Out of nowhere, they're interested in events they know you'll attend. They start asking mutual friends about gatherings with a kind of casual tone that doesn't quite ring true. They place themselves in your orbit without initiating direct contact, creating opportunities for accidental run-ins that are anything but accidental. Maybe they start showing up at the cafe you always go to, or the gym you mentioned once, or the neighborhood where you walk your dog. This isn't stalking, it's plausibility. They want a reason to see you that doesn't force them to admit they created it. They want it to feel organic, not intentional. There's a difference between coincidence and pattern, and on some level, you feel it. Coincidence happens once, maybe twice. But when someone who previously had no reason to be in your physical or social spaces suddenly appears there repeatedly, that's intentional proximity. They're building a bridge back to you, but they want it to feel like fate rather than choice. I once worked with a woman named Jennifer whose ex started attending her weekly yoga class 3 months after their breakup. He had never practiced yoga before. He lived across town. Yet suddenly there he was, mat in hand, acting as if this was a totally normal decision unrelated to her. After a couple weeks of casual, "Hey, funny seeing you here" exchanges, he asked if they could talk. The proximity wasn't random. It was preparation. He was slowly acclimating both of them to sharing space again, checking whether his presence upset her, gauging whether conversation might be welcome. Those engineered encounters were rehearsals for the real reach-out. When you notice someone repeatedly reappearing in your world after a long absence, understand what's happening. They're not ready for direct contact yet, but they're laying the groundwork by normalizing their presence first. The accidental moments are the foundation. The message is what they're building toward. The third sign is a sudden generosity with social validation. After months of silence, complete digital absence, they start liking your posts. Not all of them, not immediately, just enough to be noticed. A like here, another there, always carefully measured, never overwhelming. This is testing behavior. They're wondering if you'll notice, if you'll care, if you'll respond. Each like is a tiny experiment to see whether the door between you is still open, whether there's still space for them, whether you've fully moved on. What makes this significant is the pattern and the timing. They're not engaging at random. They're interacting with content that matters. Posts where you look genuinely happy. Posts about accomplishments. Posts that show your life moving forward. The message underneath is simple. I see you. I'm paying attention. You still matter to me. For an avoidant, even this level of engagement requires internal debate. Every like is a small admission of vulnerability. It quietly says, I haven't forgotten you. And it risks rejection because you might ignore them entirely, confirming their deepest fear that they've been replaced. Here's the important part. When an avoidant starts this kind of strategic engagement, they've already made an internal choice. They want back in. They just don't yet know how to put it into words. So they communicate through action first, through gestures that say, I'm still here, I'm watching, I'm working up to something. Watch how the engagement evolves. It often starts with neutral, low-risk content. Then it shifts toward more personal or emotionally loaded posts. That progression tells you exactly where they are in the process of building the courage to reach out. The fourth behavior is breadcrumbing through mutual connections. All of a sudden, friends start mentioning them more often. Oh, I ran into them the other day. They asked how you were doing. They said they were wondering about you. These comments aren't random. They're intentional. An avoidant who's considering reconnection often uses mutual friends as a buffer, not to deliver messages outright, but to gauge your openness. They want to know whether you ask about them, whether you seem curious, whether you sound indifferent. They're gathering emotional data without exposing themselves. This tactic also serves another function. It puts them back into your awareness. Even if you've been healing, moving forward, not thinking about them much, suddenly their name is floating around again. They're re-entering your mental space indirectly, softening the ground for eventual direct contact. This shows up again and again. An ex who hasn't spoken to you in months suddenly becomes a recurring topic in conversation. Not because your friend spontaneously became invested, but because your ex made sure they would be discussed. It's presence without vulnerability. At its core, this is fear management. Directly reaching out forces an avoidant to confront the possibility that they were wrong about needing distance, wrong about being fine alone, wrong about not missing you. So they test the waters through others first, reducing the risk of direct rejection. When mutual friends start mentioning them more frequently, especially with comments like, "they asked about you," or "they were curious how you're doing," contact is often not far away. They're constructing a story where reconnection feels mutual, natural, and welcomed. They're preparing you and themselves for the conversation they're building toward. The fifth shift is that their content starts reflecting your values. Things they once dismissed or showed no interest in suddenly appear in their posts. Maybe they never cared about environmental issues when you were together, and now they're sharing content about sustainability. They used to brush off your love for art as something frivolous or unnecessary. Now suddenly, they're sharing photos from museum visits, posting reflections on exhibitions, offering thoughtful commentary that sounds uncannily aligned with what once mattered deeply to you. The person who once rolled their eyes at galleries now seems fluent in aesthetic appreciation, as if this interest appeared overnight. They once avoided any form of self-reflection like it was a threat. Conversations about emotions or growth felt impossible. Now they're posting quotes about healing, introspection, evolution, and change. They talk about becoming better, learning lessons, understanding themselves on a deeper level. This shift isn't random self-improvement. It's targeted. It's intentional alignment. What's really happening is this. They've become acutely aware of the gaps that existed between you, the mismatches, the places where you felt unseen or unsupported, the reasons things ultimately fell apart. And before they even consider reaching out, they start working to close those gaps in visible ways. They want you to notice. They want you to see that they've changed, that they've listened, that the issues you raised didn't disappear into the void. Some of this growth may be real. Loss and distance do have a way of forcing people to confront parts of themselves they ignored before. But the timing matters, and so does the audience. If this transformation were purely personal, it wouldn't need to be broadcast. It wouldn't need witnesses. The fact that it's public tells you something important about its purpose. They need you to see the evolution, because it's part of the argument they're quietly building. It's evidence. Proof that reconnection wouldn't mean repeating the same mistakes. Think of it like reworking a personal brand before re-entering the market. They're fixing the flaws, showcasing improvements, highlighting features that were once missing. When they finally do reach out, this growth will come up. Explicitly or implicitly, they'll reference how much they've changed, how differently they see things now, how they finally understand what you needed back then. This visible alignment is the bridge they're constructing back to you. The message is what they plan to walk across it with. Your role here isn't to immediately judge or decide, it's to observe. Is this change consistent over time? Does it show up in real behavior, not just posts and captions? Are they genuinely curious about these values? Or are they performing interest to regain access to you? Time always answers that question, but recognize the signal for what it is. When an ex suddenly mirrors your values in public, reconnection is often already on their mind. After that, the next shift is subtle but important. They move from likes to comments. At first it's light, safe, non-threatening, compliments on a photo, a quick congrats on an achievement, a short response to something you shared, nothing emotional, nothing that requires depth, just enough to create interaction. These comments serve several purposes at once. They test your responsiveness. Do you reply? Do you engage? Is your tone warm or distant? They also normalize communication again. After a long silence, going straight to, "Can we talk?" feels too abrupt, too exposed. But a few weeks of casual back-and-forth comments makes future contact feel more natural. This is how avoidants warm up. They rebuild familiarity in tiny increments. Each comment is a micro-interaction that says, "We can still talk. This isn't awkward. This is okay." It reduces the psychological distance without requiring a big emotional leap. The key shift here is from passive to active engagement. Likes are easy to dismiss. Comments aren't. A comment demands acknowledgement. It places them directly in your awareness and invites response. For an avoidant, that's a real risk. Every comment is a calculated step toward vulnerability. Watch how this progresses. The comments become more frequent, slightly more personal, slightly more layered. "That looks amazing" turns into, "I remember you saying you wanted to go there." Then into, "That reminds me of the conversation we had about traveling someday." This is intimacy being reintroduced gradually, brick by brick. Eventually, the public space stops feeling sufficient. Once the comfort is there, once the engagement feels safe, the move from comments to private messages becomes almost inevitable. That's the direction this escalation is heading. Then something happens that makes your absence impossible to ignore. A parent becomes ill. They hit a major career milestone. They go through something painful and realize the people around them don't actually know them. Life delivers a moment that cuts through their emotional insulation. In moments of real joy or real pain, we reach instinctively for the people who truly see us. And if you were that person for them, these experiences bring sudden, uncomfortable clarity. They realize who's missing. And that realization hits harder than usual. This isn't manipulation, it's recognition. Something happens that makes them think, "I want to tell her this," or "She's the only one who would understand what this means." That awareness cracks their defenses in ways everyday life never could. You might hear about the event directly from them, or you might learn through mutual connections. Either way, significant life moments often trigger avoidant reach-outs because they override the usual strategies of distance and self-protection. An avoidant can maintain separation when life is calm and predictable. But introduce high emotion, real vulnerability, or meaningful stakes, and their defenses weaken fast. The person they've been keeping at arm's length suddenly becomes the person they need most. When they reach out after something major happens, understand this. The event didn't create the feelings, it exposed them. You've been on their mind. The moment just made pretending otherwise impossible. And finally, there's the paradoxical sign that confuses most people. Sometimes the clearest indicator that an avoidant is preparing to reach out is total silence. But this silence feels different. It's heavy, charged, intentional. It's not the quiet of indifference. It's the quiet of preparation. You can often feel it, even if you can't explain why. There's a presence in the absence, a sense of something building, like the stillness before a storm where everything goes quiet, but the air feels thick and expectant. This silence usually follows a period of increased activity, monitoring, liking, commenting, proximity. Then suddenly, nothing. This withdrawal isn't loss of interest. It's the final internal battle. During this time, they're rehearsing. What should I say? What if she's moved on? What if she rejects me? What if I'm too late? They're running every scenario, trying to convince themselves that reaching out is worth the emotional risk. From your side, this phase can feel disorienting. The signs were there, and now they've vanished, but understand the difference. Silence born of detachment feels empty. Silence born of anticipation feels full. When an avoidant disappears after showing interest, they're often gathering the courage to make direct contact. They've done the research, they've tested the waters, they've built the bridge. Now they're deciding whether to step onto it. When the silence breaks, it often does so abruptly, with a message more vulnerable than expected. Something like, "I know this is random, but I can't stop thinking about you." That pause was them wrestling with whether to say those words at all. The truth about avoidance reaching out is simple. By the time they contact you, they've already been reaching out internally for weeks. Every behavior described here is evidence of that internal movement, happening long before their phone lights up with your name. Recognizing these patterns doesn't mean you should wait around. It doesn't mean every small action guarantees a return. But it does help you distinguish between someone genuinely working through fear toward reconnection and someone simply lingering with no real intention. The real question isn't whether they show these signs, it's this: if they do reach out after all this internal work, are you ready to respond from clarity rather than longing? Have you done your own reflection, your own healing? Reconnection only works when both people show up differently than before. Their message will come when their fear of losing you permanently outweighs their fear of vulnerability. Your response should come from knowing whether what existed is truly worth rebuilding, whether their behavior aligns with their words, and whether this time has the foundation to be different. Watch the patterns, trust what you see, and make your choices based on consistent behavior, not imagined potential.